Good afternoon. This is the meeting of the Finance Committee of Cleveland Heights City Council, and I want to begin with calling the meeting to order. All of the committee members are here. And one of them is putting his phone away, and the council member. Vice Chair Anthony Maddox Jr. is here to join us as member of the committee, and also member Jim Posh. And then Council President Tony Kuda is here. We have guests Frank Ford and Gary Benjamin, and Andy Ballister, the clerk, is joining us, and Melody Hart sitting in the back. And if you want to say anything, let me know, okay? Happy to let you ask whatever you want. I would like to read again. I'm going to keep rereading these because the recommendations that came out of the Racial Justice Task Force are pretty explicit, and yet we have work to do in order to get there. So, 2 of the 5 that came out of the Economic Opportunity Recommendation, to use the strength of the city's tax revenue to make an agreement with its bank to make more loans in the African American community, residential and commercial, as Cuyahoga County has done. As necessary, collaborate with other municipalities pooling our economic strength to encourage banks to increase the number and amount of loans in African American communities. And finally, retain an expert in Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data to analyze annually the lending done by banks and the banking services available to the city's African American neighborhoods. The expert would be expected to prepare a report regarding that data. The city should then determine whether to report the expert study results to any bank's regulating agency under the company law. And just joining us is Acting Finance Director Tara Schuster. So thank you for coming today. We have Frank Ford here as the Senior Policy Advisor for the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research. And I'm going to go ahead. He's got some information to present to us. It's all yours.
So what I was going to do, I thought I would bring some things that were specifically done for Cleveland Heights. And I just finished this major study for County Council last night at 2 a.m. So I thought, well, maybe I can get that done today. No, that didn't work. In fact, I started to do it, and then I realized it's too risky to rush something like that. So instead, what I brought with me let me back up a step and say the format that I'm providing data and analysis to County Council is the same format that I used last year. So they have retained me 2 years in a row. And maybe I should back up and say that I started doing bank lending research in 1993 when I was teaching at the University of Colorado at Denver, and published several studies till I left there in 1999, came back to Cleveland. I'm from Cleveland. And didn't do any further bank lending research right away, but I started to get back into it, I would say 7 years ago. I think this is the 7th year that I've been doing some level of bank lending research. This study that I just finished is the most detailed, the most comprehensive, and last year's would probably be the next most comprehensive. And previously, the previous 5 years, other than this year and last year, I basically just did it without any contract. I was just doing it because I thought it was important. That's not necessarily wise. Councilwoman Cheryl Stevens and I discussed this, and she said, you know, this what you're doing is value, and we should really see if council will pay for it. And so last year, they did offer me a contract, and I produced a study which was about 95 pages, and this year it's 155. And there's some reasons for why it got bigger, but the format that I've tended to do it is usually there's a 10 to 15 page executive summary that's a narrative at the front end, and that is in another document. We can go, this is a PowerPoint we're looking at right now. I also have displayed behind this, or we can go to it, is the actual PDF file that I turned into County Council yesterday, 2 a.m. that you would see that has the executive summary. Then the bulk of what I've done is, I think this might be over 100 pages. These are mostly slides with charts and graphs and data that's explained. It has some explanatory notes. And then at the end, I usually attach some appendix. And I'm doing the same ones I did last year. Last year I did one appendix, which was a table with all the loans requested and dollars requested by every municipality and every Cleveland neighborhood for home purchase. And then a second attachment was the same thing, but for home repair loans. And we could look at that as well. In fact, you'll probably want to see that, see where's Cleveland Heights, where are you in that? But I thought what would be helpful, since I haven't brought anything really carved out for Cleveland Heights, if I were to show you some things that I'm doing at a higher level than just a single municipality, it might give you an idea to say, oh yeah, well, maybe could you do that for Cleveland Heights? Yes.
I just want to say thank you.
Yes.
No questions.
Yeah.
I just want to let the public know, because I know you, I want them to know you are absolutely larger than life in terms of the work that you do. And so I just wanted to say thank you for this work, because not only is this work serving municipalities across Cuyahoga County, but it's also adding another level of accountability to these financial institutions. And so I just want anyone to know from watching this that the work that you do is work that our financial institutions are also taking very seriously, and the data that you provide, and it's really serving as a litmus test for them. And so I want to thank you for this work, because not only is it helping guide a lot of the work across our communities in terms of our relationships with these institutions, but it has provided a level of accountability that previously I do not believe was there in terms of their impact. And so I just want to say thank you, and for the public watching is to just let them know how much your work has impacted what we do in the decision-making process. So I just want to say again, thank you for coming.
I appreciate that comment, and it actually reminds me of something I don't want to forget to say, and I could have forgotten it, but it's on my mind, so let me say that over the, I guess, decades now that I've been doing this, since 1993, there has been a history of, let me back up a little bit further, starting even in the 1970s, when civil rights organizations and community groups were raising questions to banks about, are you really meeting the credit needs of underserved people of color communities? And they were, at that time, in the 70s and 80s, they were induced to enter into major agreements. At that time were called CRA agreements, and they were called that because the Federal Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA, gave sort of the teeth to the motivation for them to do something. And what my observation is, looking at those agreements, and even more recently, now they tend to be called CBA agreements, community benefits agreements. The common thing that I've seen for decades is that there'll be this massive commitment of, X billion dollars that we're going to do. And at the end of a year or 2 years or how many years it is, it seems, oh, they did it. And yet you question, like, well, what happened down at the level of this block or the streets in this neighborhood, this suburb? And my objective that I've been, or has guided me, is to try to take this down to a lower level. Not necessarily, most of it has not been at a single community, suburb, or neighborhood level. It is, to do that it was already a massive amount of work. What I've tended to do is regional geography. So I've done east side of Cleveland, west side of Cleveland, east inner suburbs, west inner suburbs, and then outer suburbs. And then, as you'll see, I have done some tables that show each individual suburb and neighborhood. But my point is that even getting it down to that level is much lower than generally is done. And so it does help shine a light on, well, did they really do something that impacted at a community level? And I think the other thing that is worth observing or thinking about is it's a relatively new thing for governments, municipal governments or county governments, to look at the resources they have, the money you put money on deposit somewhere. And it's, really only within the last couple of decades have governments thought about, oh, we have this resource, should we be asking something in return? And should we bid that out? City of Cleveland, as it turns out, most housing advocates and people that work in this field acknowledge that the City of Cleveland under Mayor Mike White was the first city to actually do that, where they decided we're going to take all the money we put on deposit somewhere and we're going to tell the banks you can compete for that. And those who are successful, we expect something in return. City of Cleveland was the first. I'm reluctant to say how successful it was. I think over the years, after Mayor White left and other mayors came in, it eventually was on the books somewhere that was agreed to, but it wasn't monitored. There wasn't really a public process for monitoring it or reporting back. The first county government that I know of to do it was Cuyahoga County in 2020. Interesting that City of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, this is my opinion based on everything I know and think I know. But the listening public, we're out here in the world, so to speak. If anybody knows differently, please let us know. Because, but Cuyahoga County in 2020 was encouraged to follow that lead and to say, when we're putting money somewhere, and it's more than just where you put deposits, it's also what bank do you engage for other banking services like payroll and managing investments, things like that. So the county agreed to do that, and they agreed to include in the 2020 agreement with KeyBank a set of community commitments. There were 13 community commitments. They weren't really that different than commitments that you might have seen in the 70s or 80s. It was a good thing that it was attempted. The downside or the weakness of it was that the commitments were worded fairly vaguely, and most importantly, they weren't worded in a way that would have specific measurable objectives that you could, at the end of a period of time, say, what did they actually do? So it wouldn't, I'm really going to overgeneralize this to say, I'm saying all this because I'm thinking you're moving in this direction. You might want to give thought to what kind of agreement would you want to have with the bank. Merely saying increase lending, those were good objectives that you read out, by the way. But what Cuyahoga...
No, I'm not taking responsibility as Racial Justice Task Force.
Okay, but being as specific as possible about where would you like to see that? If it's a group of census tracts, what types of loans, and this is where the data becomes helpful. That if you knew, for example, that any particular bank or several banks had made X number of loans either to underserved borrowers generally or to specific underserved geographies, subgeographies in Cleveland Heights. If you knew that, then you could say, you know what, how about increasing that 20% next time? Mm-hmm. So that you get, it's really, it comes down to what can you measure for accountability? Because otherwise, and I think that as much as I credit Cuyahoga County, and I do credit them in 2020 for a fairly bold thing that they did to say to KeyBank, if you want to keep going with this contract, you've got to commit to some things for the community. And there were these 13 commitments. As much as I praise that, at the same time, I think the working group that Councilwoman Stevens convened over the last 4 years, which Gary is a member of, that working group's conclusion at the end of the 4 years was, we don't want to repeat that that way. It's good that we should repeat it, but be much more specific next time around. And the county administration is currently in negotiation with KeyBank, and this time they are looking at 3 other banks: US Bank, PNC, and US Bank, I believe.
Huntington.
Oh, Huntington, thank you for correcting me. Yes, it's PNC, you say it again.
US Bank and Huntington.
PNC, US Bank, and Huntington, right. And I do have some of the tables and charts that I do here are specifically aimed at those 4. They're in the middle of these negotiations, and I think they hope to have this finalized so that beginning January, I think, then the new agreements with not just one bank, but now 4 would start. And I think the big question is, what will that look like? Will the lessons of the last 4 years actually be applied? That was a lot of tangent that I went off, but maybe it was useful though for you. Yeah.
I just didn't know if you or Gary wanted to, I didn't know if it would be helpful to explain why they picked those 4 banks or what was significant about them.
They did have, and Gary, feel free to weigh in here, but my recollection is they did have a bidding or an RFP or an RFQ process. It might have been a request for qualifications. And I believe that more than those 4 did apply. And the scoring, I really can't speak to the scoring. I know that some of the scoring elements had to do with community, impact. But they ended up with these 4. It's one thing that has been talked about a lot in the discussions around this over the last several years is that one thing that governments on this level seem to need is something called a lockbox, which is not a physical lockbox, but actually, do you want to attempt to explain that?
I turned melody for that. I thought
No, I think it'd be worth, because and it turns out that KeyBank seems to be the unique provider, and so they have this leg up in negotiating.
And not every bank does a lockbox.
Yeah.
What it is instead of getting the checks into yourself and then someone in your office has to process them and they have to go take them for deposit, instead you direct it, you have a lockbox at the bank. It's actually at the post office. The bank picks it up. The bank processes it through, so it immediately gets into the bank quickly and it doesn't have to go through all your staff of processing. So that's one of the items of business that some banks choose to do.
KeyBank has invested so large, and that's part of what the second building at the Tiedemann campus is for, specifically a full staff just for
Oh, really?
the lockbox process. Their corporate.
Tara, what months does our banking the service contract go? Does it go January to December or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's calendar, all right.
Do one bank or more than one?
More than one.
Okay.
Most banks more than one. I have an investment one. I have
Right.
2 investment.
Okay. Well, so back to what I brought with me. What I was going to do is walk through some of these slides, which means if we were to try to do the 120 some slides over here, we're going to be here for hours, and you don't want to do that. So allow me the benefit of just jumping around a little bit here. So I'm going to try to go to, and what I'm going to try to land on are the things which, this is a racial justice task force, so I'm going to try to land on things that are specifically relate to that
Thank you.
subject.
Yeah.
So there are some things that I did do as at the beginning of this report that are not specifically lending related, but you might find them interesting and worth looking at. One is looking at since 2004, what has been the activity of investors buying out of state, out of Cleveland Heights certainly, and out of Cleveland, out of county. And what you can see is that the greatest increase in investor activity is the east side of Cleveland, and the next greatest is the east inner suburbs. Now this is through 2020. And what this is the percent of acquisitions in a particular year that were by a business named entity, as opposed to an individual, as opposed to a government body I think nonprofits were excluded from this. So,
Can you get
yeah.
that data even more recently than 2020? Is that available?
Yes, but the only, okay, let me think this through for a second. There are two people that have been working on this subsequent to 2020. I am one of them. But the person who's probably even done more work than me on this is a staff person at the City of Cleveland's Building and Housing Department, Tim Kobe. And both of us, well, and there's a third person who's played a role in this, and that is Mike Schramm, who's with Case Western Reserve. Mike is actually both with the County Land Bank and with Case Western Reserve. In his role at Case Western, has access to a lot of data that can be useful here. So I'm giving you a vague answer. The answer is yes, and I've attempted to do some things subsequent to 2020. I haven't duplicated that chart though.
I asked that because
Yeah.
we have a sense that we're seeing more LLCs coming in and purchasing our homes because of the lower cost to investors.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's bringing us to this point is we want families to own those homes and not LLCs.
Well, go ahead.
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
along with that, she's correct that I imagine, just based on the conversations that I've had, that this is actually pretty similar to what it was, but the numbers have just gone up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the order is exactly the
Yeah.
same, so absolutely.
Well, it's worth just take a moment to offer this thought, and I do think I address it in here somewhere, but the dilemma that seems to be occurring is that, so we have on one hand, in many parts of the county, certainly the east side of Cleveland for sure, and some east inner suburbs, we have home sale prices which still may be affordable. Now I'm sure there's parts of Cleveland Heights where you would say, no, it isn't. Just like there are parts of Cleveland that it isn't, but in the east side of Cleveland, the median sale price on the east side of Cleveland at the end of 2023 was $55,000. That's affordable. And those are not all bombed out vacant. Those are homes that some of them are in decent shape. They may need repair, but they're an affordable housing opportunity, affordable homeownership opportunity. But then you have investors who see that as an incredible opportunity, and they'll pay cash. And because they'll pay cash, two things happen. One is they're not waiting for 6 weeks for a loan to close. So for private parties trying to buy the same house, they're working through a realtor and they're trying to get a loan. It may take them 6 weeks or whatever the current time period is. The investor is going to do it in a matter of days. So that's one way that people lose out on the opportunity. The second way is that, and this is something the data does, I think, support this. It's been suspected by housing advocates locally for a number of years that many banks don't seem to want to do these low dollar transactions. Now, does that mean at a corporate level in the boardroom, banks are passing a resolution saying, we're just not going to make loans in X neighborhood because we don't want to do those? A lot of it might be human nature. If loan officers are paid by commission and they've got the chance to work so many hours on a $50,000 transaction versus a $150,000 transaction, which one are they going to work on? The commission is going to be higher on the 150. So one of the most interesting things that came out, it was about a year ago, was Councilman Mike Polensek at the City of Cleveland told me, I forget how this came about. He knew I was doing the research and he knew we were looking into all this. And he said, I want to tell you a story. He said, I tried to buy the house next to mine in Collinwood, in the Collinwood neighborhood of Cleveland. It was for sale for $80,000. And I went to KeyBank, a local KeyBank branch, and talked to a loan officer, and they said, we don't make loans under $100,000. And he was trying to buy a home next to him just to make sure it went to the right. He didn't want an investor to get it, just as you were saying. But that is the first time while many housing advocates have suspected this may be happening, it's the first time anybody actually heard it quoted from a fairly, established person in civic life. So,
What you stated is the largest problem in banking that I think people don't talk about. Internally to banks, there's even pushback in their own employees. For instance, you have loan officers on the east side who are pushing back because they're in branches here and they don't make nearly the money that their counterparts and coworkers make on the west side.
Yeah,
Because that's where those loans are being booked and the value is.
right.
So Key Bank, excuse me, you're starting to see them close even more branches on the east side and many other banks to put that investment in, and that's because the property values are higher over there. So they're going to make that money. And because Key Bank is such a conservative bank, they're viewing some of those properties that are that lower hanging fruit as a much higher risk than many other banks do. And because Key Bank is so risk averse, it's also one of the reasons that put them in this circumstance. But what you're saying is absolutely right. Many loan officers won't even pay attention or touch some of these loans on the east side because it doesn't give them nearly the kind of money that they can earn back themselves as many of their counterparts. And so you're seeing that investment move west. You're seeing employees who are leaving some banks on the east side to work for banks that are offering them branches on the west side for that exact reason. The investment is just night and day. It's just unreal. So the fact that you bring that up is just an awesome, because I don't think the public really understands that that's how that works. They're making that money off commission. And so they want to be where those loans are. And so you have people who are really pulling back from our community because it's much more difficult to also get many of us approved for those loans on the east side in many cases.
And to be fair to Key Bank, it is unfortunate they happen to be the bank that their loan officer didn't know he was talking to a Cleveland City Council person. And that person then has reported this and backed it up at public meetings, said, yes, that's what happened. But I don't believe, to be fair to Key Bank, that this is limited. It's not like Key Bank's the only bank dealing with this. But in any case, I wanted to just say, so there are really two things going on here. One is that the investors have the ability to come in and pay cash. That removes some affordable homeownership opportunities from people who could otherwise benefit from them. And then the second issue is the ability to get the loan for a low dollar loan, relatively low dollar. And the definition of what do we mean by small dollar or low dollar, I would say a couple of years ago, 50,000 was what most people were focused on, and now 100,000 has become really the benchmark. I do the analysis both ways in this study. I look at the 50,000 and below and the 100,000 and below, but at some point I may just limit it to 100 and below. But anyway, so let me move on to let's see. Oh, here's something that is probably important, and this could be done with Cleveland Heights in mind. So right now, this is the 5 sub-geographies that I had mentioned before. This is looking at homeownership, the change in number of owner-occupied homeowner units between basically a 20-year period. And only the outer suburbs has seen an increase. I mean, really, this is a countywide problem. But notice where the biggest part of the problem is. It's the majority African-American east side of Cleveland and the eastern suburbs. Let's say, I think east side of Cleveland is now 80%. No, let me back up. East side of Cleveland, I think at the latest census is about 75% African-American. And the eastern suburbs is 57%, I believe. But those two have the greatest drop. Now, the west side of Cleveland also has a drop, and so does the western suburbs, but not as much. But that could be replicated either with a Cleveland Heights bar just squeezed in there, or it could be looking at, I don't know, it could be done some different ways to identify, and I haven't done it yet. I actually had in mind, though, I'll try to do that before the meeting at 4. Well, that didn't work. I couldn't get to it. But anyway, we keep going.
I know this
Yes.
is a bit of a side issue,
Yeah.
but I remember in the VAPAC meeting where you introduced this, they were also a lot less likely to pull permits and do the
that's
fixing up the house. And that's where the solutions kind of have to work with the housing departments.
That's true.
Because you know, if we're not controlling our end of things, you know, that's a problem.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. What I was gonna say Tony, but I'll say as council president was referring to, there is something that I did which I didn't bring with me, but I used, the city of Cleveland had done a door-to-door survey of all the properties in Cleveland. They did it with the Western Reserve Land Conservancy where I used to work. And using that data, and then merging it with some data I got from Case Western Reserve on investor ownership, what I found was that if I, and by the way, you haven't done a survey door-to-door of properties here, have you? Or
We
have
just-
you?
We just finished it.
Oh, did you? Did you?
Western Reserve.
Did they? Okay, so you probably used the same A, B, C, D, F
Yes, they
rating?
did. Yes, they
So
did.
A's and
Plus more, they even had a list of conditions as well.
good. So you understand if I say that what I did is I took the A and B properties as a group reflecting essentially in reasonably good condition, the C, D, and F properties being those that were in some level of disrepair. C's not being that bad, but needing repair. D's and F's, of course, needing more. And then what I did is I looked at, if I took those two groups and looked at what would be the percent of the disrepair properties needing repair that were owned by investors, by individuals, and then grouping nonprofits and governments together. And there was a definite, you could see the difference was pretty striking, that the investor-owned properties were much more likely to be C, D, and F properties compared to what individual owners or nonprofits and governments own. So you're right. I mean, if you don't hold them, and again, to be fair, because it's not that every investor is bad. That's certainly not true. It's just that unfortunately there is some significant number that are not going to play by the rules. And anyway.
Well, the thing that concerns me is that when somebody who's gonna own or occupy has a CD or F property, the money that they need to fix it up is part of this
Well, you're right.
conversation. You know, cause they,
In fact, we're gonna get to that in a minute where I'm gonna show you access to home repair loans is one of the biggest. So I'll just say this now while I'm thinking of it. If I think of what are the really top level observations or findings from this kind of research, number one is the challenge of accessing the low dollar loans for a home purchase. The second would be the challenge of accessing home repair loans in the same communities that tend to be somewhat underserved. Those two things come to mind right away. Those are generally unmet credit needs that still need. Go ahead.
As we build up the kind of things we wanna look at and the committee can approve the survey, would the results from the Western Reserve study help you? We have not seen them yet.
Oh, the one that they just did for you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Actually, so that would give me the ability to do what I just described, which was just for the city of Cleveland. I should have clarified. That
Yeah.
A, B, C, D, F, that was
Right.
right, but that could be done, that could be replicated exactly the same way. I will say that there's a part of that analysis that's difficult because there isn't some really easy way to take every investment property and say, okay, we've just identified them. What has to be done almost, and that's what I did for the analysis I did, I painstakingly went through thousands of records and then created a column off to the right where I put a flag or a 1 saying investor and a different flag for individual. And the reason this is hard is because John Smith individual, if he's a doctor or a real estate broker in California, but he owns 6 properties in Cleveland Heights,
Right.
he's an investor.
Yeah.
Yet he looks like an individual if you can't, The other thing about the only way to look for the corporate, or I say corporate, I don't mean corporation specifically, but business owned, is you gotta take all the suffixes. It's not just CORPINC, LLC. I mean, there's if you really think about it, there's many more than that. And then there's keywords, contractor, properties, investor. There's a whole lot of words you gotta plug in. It's not easy, so, but it can be done. That was the question.
Yeah, and
Can it
then,
be done?
and they are supposedly going to be downloading or uploading, whichever direction you go, to
Private Facebook.
NST.
Oh, yeah.
So that could be searched by owner occupied, correct?
Yes, definitely, that's gonna be the easier, well, it's easy to the extent that the county records are accurate. And the way you would usually do it is you would look for the homeowner credit in the tax records. And unfortunately, I'm gonna say those are probably fairly accurate, but it's not likely to be 100%, but it'd be
Right.
good enough.
Plus or minus?
I would say it's good enough for the purpose of doing this,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So let me go on, so this one was, this is a City of Cleveland one, but it's interesting, and I don't know whether it would, I have something, actually, I think I didn't bring it with me now that I think of it. I have something that shows the median home sale price over the same period of time, 2000 to 2023. Actually, this is August 2023, but I have it through December of 23 that does show Cleveland Heights. I don't know if I did put it on this USB drive, but anyway, here's something interesting that probably is worth thinking about. Notice that the west side of Cleveland is a blue line, the east side is red. Notice how close they were before the foreclosure crisis really took off. They weren't that far apart. And then what you had was, and this isn't just Cleveland and Cuyahoga, this was across the country, that lenders saw the profit of targeting Black communities for higher interest loans on the theory that, well, these are higher risk properties, therefore we can justify higher interest. Fannie Mae did a study which found that in fact, Black home borrowers who actually qualified for prime loans were steered to subprime because it was more profitable. So the result of that is you get all these subprime loans that this group had, the red group had, that were very hard to maintain. They're higher interest, they're gonna, all it takes is, a doctor's bill, you miss a payment, something happens. Many more foreclosures resulted in all the vacancy and abandonment on the east side, which drove down prices in a ridiculous way.
Can I park you
Yeah.
just for a second?
Yeah.
There's something else here that I think the public should know about these figures in terms of this income. Keep in mind, everything that you just said is true. And so our home values may be worth less, our interest rates are higher. But I also want the public to know that 30% of average Americans right now have less than $1,000 in their savings account.
Yeah.
And so now there's less money
It's a
to
sobering
invest.
thought.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so the finances are tight from the beginning, from the moment they turn the key into
Yeah.
that home, there isn't anything extra.
Right.
And so that's part of the issue there as well.
I don't know whether, I bring this up because, I'm assuming you have areas of Cleveland Heights where the census tracts there are more African American than white and vice versa somewhere else. It could be possibly done to do something, and I would definitely have to need the help from Case Western probably to do this, but they've been very helpful actually. So you can see what happens here, there's this much bigger drop, and then the recovery is not as great because the east side is recovering, and that is good news. But notice it's still 28,750 below where it was, so it's still underwater, whereas the west side is 36,000 above where it was. The west side was not burdened with the same number of vacant, abandoned, blighted homes that the east side has been, and it's better. Of course, the work of the land bank and the city's building and housing department has basically removed a lot of the blight, but it's not all gone. So to the extent that it's still there, it's holding things back. And this is lost equity. you think about the lost equity for homeowners. So anyway, not to dwell on that too much, but okay,
No, can I?
Yeah, yeah, we can go
I'm sorry, I
back.
can't help myself.
Yes,
This is
all right.
this is important for a couple of reasons, because it's gonna bring up some of the suggestions that we discussed previously about how to resolve this. But what you said is true again. I want folks to keep in mind that there's two reasons that these numbers are looking like this. The first is how they're lending and the percent of interest rates that we're getting. But there's also the number of people who are applying for these loans that are qualified. And so for everyone watching and for this council, one of the things that I know we're gonna have to focus on is not just leveraging and making sure that they're approving people who are qualified for these mortgages, but what the city can do to increase the amount of people who can be approved for these loans. And that goes back into investing in financial literacy. Because one of the things that you stated that I want people to understand is, for many African Americans, when they buy a home, that next generation is starting over again. And by that, I mean, my grandparents or their grandparents, those homes are gone. In most cases, generations are passing those homes on, or even investment in those homes. But in my generation, for many cases in the African American community, we're starting over from scratch. Grandma's home was taken from the bank when she died, or she
I see exactly what you're saying.
Yep, and so there's
The idea of generational wealth, it was interrupted,
absolutely.
basically, yeah. No, that's a good point. What I did here was looking at the red bars are the number of 1 to 3 family arm's length sales. So those are basically homes. I mean, a 3-family home, could have first and second floor double, but an attic has a third unit. So these are not multifamily, and 90% of them, actually I have a little note here that says 99% of all home sales are 1 to 2 families, so the 3 unit is statistically insignificant. Anyway, matching this, aligning it with 1 to 4 family home loans, because the home mortgage disclosure data comes as 1 to 4 family. So it's not a total apples to apples here, but because again, 99% of all the transactions are 1 to 2 family, it is basically apples to apples. What I was looking at was, think of it this way: outer suburbs, 77% of all the homes that were sold had a mortgage associated with them. It's not a perfect thing. There's people going to pay cash in many cases, especially if they can afford to, maybe, or they borrow from a family member. But the biggest difference is when you get to the east side of Cleveland, where the number of sales isn't that small. It's actually on par with at least the west side of Cleveland. It's about the same. Very much on par with the west inner suburbs. It's less than the east inner suburbs, and it's less than the outer. But it's not small. But you only have 927 mortgages. Only 25% of those 1 to 3 family arm's length sales had a mortgage associated with them. So it suggests, what I have in the note at the bottom, it suggests either a couple things, one of two things, maybe both, that a high degree of investor acquisitions where these are all being paid by cash. There's no mortgage because they didn't need to. And it's a missed opportunity, a missed affordable opportunity.
I spent a lot of time looking at my place because we did the inventory for Greater Cleveland congregations. Do you take into account are you looking at sales only when there was money transfer between the parties versus when the quit claims are done between
This
LLCs?
excludes, I'm pretty sure that the data that I have from Case, I'm speaking slowly, so I'm sure of myself here. I'm 99.9% certain that what they refer to as an arm's length sale in the data set excludes quitclaim deeds, gifts, transfers between partners in the same partnership, because the idea of arm's length is 2 unrelated parties.
Yeah. Okay.
It also excludes sheriff sales. It excludes transfers between banks and Fannie Mae to a bank. So I think the answer is pretty definite, yes, that it does. Yeah.
Do you have a question, Tim?
Oh, yeah. No. Let's see. I just threw this in because, I think we're all, we know that vacant property's down, but interestingly enough, on the east side of Cleveland and the west side, it's actually going up slightly, which is really, I was surprised. This comes from the US postal data that Case gets. I believe they may have it in a way that could be brought out by suburb, but your survey, your door-to-door survey might be,
Yeah, because they would have,
they would make a note of, the surveyor on the sidewalk would say whether or not there is one possible issue there, which I'll share with you. What I did observe when I worked at the Land Conservancy, where we were doing these surveys for the city of Cleveland, we did one in 2015, 2018. Now, I wasn't there when they did the most recent one just a year ago, but what I discovered was the surveyor standing in front of an east side home that's in really bad shape and looks vacant, they're gonna say, well, that has to be vacant, of course. They're on the west side and they're looking at a house that's in better shape and thinking, that can't be vacant. And yet sometimes the postal data would say the west side home was vacant, and conversely it would say the east side home, which looks terrible, actually has somebody there. And if, of course, the surveyors could leave the sidewalk, go around the back and look at the meter, the electric meter, and see it's still running, or it might be on the side of the house. Of course, the problem is they don't want the surveyors going on the property. So there's a little bit of a limitation to door-to-door surveys.
It's the same issue that banks have, because when they're starting the foreclosure process on a customer, they'll do what's called a drive-by. They can go onto the property, they're encouraged to look at them, they're encouraged to do those things, but they tend to do exactly what the surveyors do and drive by. The land bank, actually, I got a couple feedback from residents just this past week who put stickers on doors for contacts because they thought homes were empty based on the surveyors who drove by.
Somebody walks out and says,
"What are you doing? What's going on?" So I think, and this is just something for us to say, I don't know to who, but the process that they do for those checks absolutely has to improve, because it's making people's lives a living hell in some cases.
I'm sure. Well, let's see, okay, so we're getting more into, interest rates, if you weren't aware, notice that interest rates were pretty stable from 16 through 21. Then they jumped in 22 and they jumped again in 23, and I believe they might be up again in 24. Do you know? Anybody know?
I'm hearing that they're thinking about
They're
reducing.
going to drop September and October, but not drastically as they were originally planned. But there's going to be two, one at the end of September, I believe one at the beginning of October is what the Fed is planning right now. But it's not going to move it a whole lot.
Well, what the impact of this is when interest rates went up in 22, the number of applications for a home purchase went down. And the reason that's worth noting is because then if you only looked at what is the number of loans a bank did from year to year, it would drop. In many cases, it did drop. And if you were not aware of this or not thinking about this, you'd say, so KeyBank went from 75 loans, I'm gonna make this number up, 75 loans in X neighborhood, and they went down to 50. That's really not good. What happened? Why did they? Well, they didn't get the applications. And I shouldn't have picked on KeyBank again, but in this case, I'm trying to show why you have to be careful about that. And that prompted me to, one of the reasons the study that I did this year is 150 pages instead of 90, is because I added the analysis of market share percent of loans in addition to just the raw number of loans. I didn't do it for everything, but I did it for a lot of things,
Can I ask you a question? Because I noticed you have the 4 banks there, but then there's cross-country. And I want the public to know that my wife just left there. She actually works at Church Christ Lending Fund now, but she was there. And I was just curious, did you guys have any conversations with just mortgage lenders around that or any data? I was just curious.
it definitely is in the data. You'll see it in a minute. Yeah, Cross Country is actually probably the number one lender for home purchase mortgages to African Americans for home purchase. The number one lender for home repair for African Americans, I believe, is going to be Huntington. We'll see this in a minute. There is this thing I observed that the number of loans to Black borrowers has been increasing, and that's actually a good thing. It's a good thing in one respect. Where it isn't a good thing is that it means, well, actually I can just show you. So, and I say, however, a deeper look reveals areas of concerns. When you look at where the Black borrowers are coming from, the east side of Cleveland, you would think would rank, the largest number of the highest Black populations, the east side of Cleveland. And if we went back to previous chart showed a fairly healthy number of arms length transactions in the east side of Cleveland. I guess my point is that I'm concerned that the Black borrowers who are getting loans are getting them as they're moving outward. And maybe I've got one more thing that would show that. Well, here's another way to look at it. That's not the same thing, but I don't know. It's just something that I thought would be worth noting, that it is a good thing that in the bigger picture at a 20,000 foot level for the whole county, the number of Black borrowers getting home purchase loans is increasing. And yet it's not necessarily benefiting the hardest hit area of the east side of Cleveland, where there's all these affordable homes that could be bought.
That really looks like redlining.
Well, yeah, whether it's intentional or not. I mean, redlining, you know, there's intentional redlining, we're just not gonna make loans to you. And then there's redlining, which is, you know, but go ahead, got a question?
Do you have a population slide so we can actually tell? Because you're right, there's a pretty big population difference.
You're right, there is. You're right. And I don't have it, but you're absolutely right. For example, you're right. These numbers could be put into proportion if you said, what is this in relation to the population of the east side? And what is this in relation to the population of the outer suburbs and so on? And no, I didn't do that.
Could we
We could do
do that in our
Oh yeah,
survey?
yes, no, I just need to be pushed and nudged. It's really what it is.
I mean, that's really informative, I mean, it could be really
Yes.
beneficial to us.
It could be, yeah, no, I agree, so
Something else that's driving this number is what lenders communicate when Black borrowers in many cases go to purchase a home. I'll give you an example of a typical scenario. You'll have a borrower who they may look at a house in Cleveland Heights, or they may look at a house, this is actually a great example. They're in Cleveland Heights, all right, but let's say the house is on the border of Caledonia, it's in Noble area. You'll have lenders who will say, hey, or even a realtor to say, they'll nudge you a little bit and say,
Yeah.
this can go through a lot faster
Yeah.
if you were to look in another neighborhood.
I see,
And
right,
so we're shifting people because they don't want the risk of owning properties and having a lien on properties in these neighborhoods.
right.
They're telling folks, hey, we don't have a problem doing this with you here,
Mhm.
but how about we nudge you in this other area where we can get more of a return? We know there's more equity in that property. If we do have to do a foreclosure, we
Yeah.
know we're gonna get that. And so you're seeing that as well. And so a lot of Black borrowers are listening because they say, hey, I want to own a home. And even though I would like to be in Cleveland Heights, if you're saying that my lender is going to have an easier time approving me over here, that's where I will go. And so it's driving it not just from city to city, but even areas of one city into another. And so I can tell you it happened to me. It just so happens the house where I live on Scarborough and Fairmount Cedar, but I grew up on Noble. Once I started looking at homes in that area, it was much easier to talk to those financial institutions there
Yeah.
because the properties there were less risky than those properties where my parents live in the Noble area. And so you see they're driving that conversation this way. They even treat property inspections a little bit differently when they're going through that way. And so it drives all of our decision making. So there's a lot that plays into that, especially if you have some Black families that really want to own a home. They'll go ahead and listen to that pressure and
Yeah.
purchase somewhere else.
So I know we're getting close to time here. Are we looking at an engagement
That's what I would like to have the committee decide today, if we wanna go ahead with pursuing having Mr. Ford do a survey for us. We don't have, it's like very clearly that we don't stand out on these graphs. And I would like to have that perspective. That's from my point of view, so
No, I agree. I think anything that we do from any data that you can pick up would help us to target how, from a programming or a budgetary standpoint, what we could do. So I would
Yeah.
absolutely.
and Councillor Posh, what do you think?
Oh, I absolutely agree, but I think we need to look at sort of what the end game here is. I mean, what was done, I mean, recreating what was done for the Cuyahoga County, I haven't looked through the data. I mean, we just got it. I'm not sure that's necessarily appropriate for us. But from the perspective of the Racial Justice Task Force, I mean, maybe, and I don't know how this works as far as like a scope. Usually when you engage someone, there's a definitive scope of work and, you know, someone's gonna have to worry about the number of hours that are gonna go into it. But it almost seems to me that have Mr. Ford look at our Racial Justice Task Force recommendations and come back with us just with kind of a quick, hey, this is what we think this scope is gonna look like. It's very helpful having Gary here, but you need to engage a piece of the Racial Justice Task Force again to get them engaged and work on all the detail and then bring it back to us. I mean, and the reason I suggest that is there's a lot of institutional knowledge that was built in the Racial Justice Task Force and which we don't necessarily have. And we have executive summaries and we know it's been good work, but this is sort of like the detail that would be helpful that can sort of bubble up. Now, maybe the process that the Racial Justice Task Force, again, kind of, you know, before my time, you know, maybe they already went through a lot of this. So this is kind of real easy. Maybe this is much easier than what I perceive it to be.
Gary, would you say, because you spent a lot of time looking at data through your subcommittee, so how would you respond to that?
We had data from the 2020 report to HUD, the city did. And I think another one is due soon. I don't know, Brian usually knows Brian Iorio. Or contracts them out. Actually, the last one's at the Fair Housing Center did it. So use that data. And it had some of this in it, but not a lot. Probably because Frank wasn't there then. But I think piggybacking on that would make sense, because I believe it's due. It's supposed to every 3 to 5 years, and that was 4 years ago now. We did talk, to more directly answer Jim's question, we did talk a lot about what data we wanted to see. And Frank did this with us. Barbara Anderson was there that day too. I think it was the first meeting we had 3 years ago. And so my memory as to what the discussions were is hazy, but pretty much was the data on mortgage lending and home repairs for Cleveland Heights would be important for us to know to put goals in any kind of contract we put out. And then you have other data that you do that might be something you could suggest. I'm interested in this last slide because it looks like we're doing okay in some ways. East inner suburbs are, Black communities getting 1,100 loans.
But it's not broken down to.
You could be robbing
Yeah.
Peter.
We don't know how we're doing in
I
Cleveland
don't know
Heights.
which city, right?
So could you use the data that Western Reserve Land Conservancy did to
Yeah, you asked that same, it's similar to your question. Yes, I'm pretty confident that I could. There's to replicate that one piece that I did with investor versus individual versus nonprofit and government. I think I would need some help from Case Western because I think what they did for me is they then added some additional data to the survey results that helped me do that analysis. This is from my memory yet. But yes, I think it can be done. Yeah.
I also think there's another piece here too, and maybe this is the more urgent piece, just knowing where we are in the year. I mean, if we're walking down a path where we wanna ask our finance department to renegotiate a deal with their borrowers, relationships, their banking relationships, what do we need in order to be prepared for that conversation? Who does the negotiation? Is it even feasible for just knowing all the work that's going through department that you even could negotiate that? I mean, and who would do it? Would it be, I mean, would it come out of the mayor's office? I don't know.
No, it usually comes from the finance department. And basically, because the contract's been, they switched to US Bank for our main operating in 2013 or 14. So I would do a whole bidding thing, putting out like the RFQ, RFP, and then going to the bank. So all this would have to be
When would you be?
worked into it.
This goes back to the leverage part, where I think that it may not even be possible depending on how we come to those financial institutions. And I don't mean you specifically, but I mean the municipalities as a whole. One of the things I've been talking to Gary about is the fact that you have a lot of municipalities, not just here, but across the country, that are putting this leverage on. And specifically the city of Buffalo with Key Bank already and First Niagara. And so the question is, if you were to have a partnership of municipalities going to some of these financial institutions and tell them decisions that they want to make based on what they will or they're not doing, you might be able to see a lot of change without having to move those accounts. But if they can see that this is something that broader communities are coming together on, that threat of that leverage might make it easier for them. And that's why I was one of my action plan takeaways is how many other municipalities around here are having these issues and seeing these problems. Because walking in as one city is much different to walking into Key Bank and there's 6 of you that are holding money, or US Bank and there's 9 of us. And so really looking to see how we can partner with this, I think, is key, because you're going to see a greater level of leverage, not just for the deposits and the lending, but I think their community engagement and how they go about investing back. And so that's what I would like to look at, is to see if municipalities can really come together, some of these east side suburbs, to say, hey, we are collectively fed up with this. We want to see some changes, and maybe that would make your job a little easier, just the threat of that versus going in there. We still have that, but I don't know what that looks like.
But I'm not sure that threat should be delivered by
Right.
the finance director that has to have
I think that's one of the things that
relationship with the bank.
you all know, that we've been trying to make sure that we don't overburden our finance department. And timing wise, it's September. And you'd be looking at a January through December contract, so we'd have to be looking at trying to put pressure on them between now and December. That doesn't feel professional to me, and it doesn't feel like it's adequate amount of time to do what we're talking about doing. So I would like to see this survey done, and we need to specify the parameters for what we would want Frank to do. Are you able to give us some kind of an estimate in terms of the cost, or is that asking too much?
I've been sort of thinking about that while I was sitting here.
Would you need a scope of work to see first?
Well, of course, we would want to develop a scope of work.
Right.
But I think what would still be helpful, what I'll do is, a number of things are going through my mind. Trying to get them organized. So yesterday at 2 a.m., I sent a draft 155-page document to Councilwoman Stevens. And I CC'd a couple other people. Gary was one of them, actually. That by either tomorrow or Monday at the latest, that will be finalized to where it can now go to the county council members. When that happens, then you could get it. And you might want to look through that. We're sort of going through some of it, we didn't get through that much. You could look through it at your own time and say, oh, that looks interesting. What if that were done? Let me give you an example of just one. Let me just jump way ahead. Okay, so let's go to home repair, actually. Hold on. Just home improvement loans. This is Cuyahoga County home improvement loans. This is the top lenders, top 15 who made home improvement loans in Cuyahoga County. And it's sorted by this column, number of loans made. But you've got the applications, you've got the percent of loans were made, out of the applications, then you have what were the total dollars asked for, and what were the total dollars loaned, and what was the percent. And then what's the market share out of all the loans, which is this 3290 again is the top 15. 3500 is all of the home repair loans in Cuyahoga County. What was the market share? So Huntington's market share was 19.2%. The question, if you imagine this being, what if this was Cleveland Heights home repair? Just Cleveland Heights. Who are our top 15 lenders? They may not be a lender you're currently doing business with. You may ask yourself, gee, should we be rethinking that? Or could we say to the bank we are doing business with, well, I think whatever that bank is, would we like them to step up and do more in our community? I mean, this is one idea, so that's certainly that, and this for home repair and for home purchase would be useful.
That right there is a level of accountability that I think a lot of financial institutions need, because I'm 100% positive why Huntington Bank is doing that level of business. They are going into those communities, they're engaging, and they're going after us, they're knocking on those doors.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yep, that other banks, they're not engaging in that manner, that way. And so you're
Well,
absolutely right about that.
One other thing to show you, just to give you an idea of what happened here, if we look at 7 of these lenders entered into what are called the CBA agreements back in 2016 through, some of them were a little bit later. But notice Huntington's the green line, and KeyBank is the red line.
Mm-hmm.
KeyBank was by far the largest home repair lender in Cuyahoga County. And they made this commitment in 2016. They made this big $1 billion commitment. It was multi-state. It wasn't just Cuyahoga County. And yet their numbers here, this is why these $1 billion agreements at a 20,000 foot level don't really tell you until you get down to this level and you say, wait, what happened in Cuyahoga? How come KeyBank's lending and home repair went down? Now it's coming up a little bit here, actually maybe under some pressure since they signed the agreement with the county. And look what Huntington did. They started relatively low and now they're the leader. So you don't get this. Well, you got to put some effort in
Absolutely.
to get that, to get those additional applications.
We should say a couple of background things too. These agreements were national through the what is NCR? National
Yeah. Community Reinvestment.
Reinvestment Coalition, so ncrc.org if you wanna look them up, because the city should be a member. And that was a good reaction. The other thing is the GCC group, when we did our research, found that US Bank was the biggest foreclosing entity in Cleveland Heights by far.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And we worked with them, and they worked with us. And last I heard, they were, which was 3 years ago, they were improving the way they would took care of the houses on the north side that were foreclosed.
That's because of the foreclosure bond.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
They also had limited programming for once a customer went in foreclosure to get them back out. And so that was part of the problem. Once you got in with US Bank, that train left the station. And in many cases, other financial institutions had stopgaps. KeyBank they just blow through. And so they're changing how they're approaching their loss mitigation is what that is. Their loss mitigation and how they're handling everything in that manner, which by the way is why KeyBank's number dropped. I happened to be in a meeting back then when this happened, and it's because nationally of what they did. KeyBank wasn't doing first mortgages for quite a number of years, and in fact, when the mortgages crashed in 2008, they weren't doing them. They were doing second mortgages, home repair loans, pool loans, things like that. Huge number of them were falling into foreclosure at the same time. So they were the second lender foreclosing on many of these properties. So they pulled back the way they were investing in some of these because they were concerned about the risk. And unfortunately, again, they are very conservative. They went too far and they just pulled back in terms of some of those products that they were offering and changing them now. I also, just for the public watching this, one of the things I'm curious about is not only how they're lending, but what products are they offering? That's critical and very key, because each of these banks are not offering the exact same types of products with the same types of parameters in terms of home repair loans, or what some banks call window loans, pool loans, reinvestment loans, things like that. And so the number of programs or products that they're offering to the community also matters. And by far, Huntington had way more products that they were offering for customers. And so you're seeing that shift. And Key Bank was decreasing along with a couple other banks.
Because I really would like to pull this together, are we in agreement as a committee that we need to have another meeting to set up the parameters to do a scope of work, as we call it that, or whatever we call it? And would you be able to join us?
Oh, yeah. Sure, I would come back.
Yeah.
And I'd almost suggest that, I don't feel I'm qualified to analyze what that scope of work, come up with a scope of work ourselves. I almost feel like we need assistance, maybe a presentation from Mr. Ford on what a likely scope of work would look like with some costs, and maybe that would be the next meeting.
That sounds
If that's the appropriate way that you.
The only thing that I would ask is if you could, all of you, to the extent that you have time to do it, if you could look at the document, you should get Monday at the latest.
Okay.
And if you could go through it and if you see something, say, oh yeah, that would be useful. I could attempt to do that, but it'd be helpful if you had strong opinions about something you thought you'd want me to do.
That's easy.
Yeah. And then we could sort of merge those two things. I give you my suggestions about, I think this would be useful to you, but you might have your own ideas about that. I will say that the only thing we've talked about that is a challenge, and I've referenced it a couple times, is the work, taking your survey and trying to match it with investors. It's very time consuming, unfortunately. There doesn't seem to be an easy way to automate the identification of investors. Now, your investor pool is going to be a lot smaller than trying to do it for the whole county or for the city of Cleveland, I guess was. But there's one other thing I have to tell you. So you really need this by January 1. You need this before that because you want to be negotiating leading up to January 1.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, though, if that's realistic.
I don't think it's realistic.
Yeah.
Well, the reason what I wanted to say is that so I've just finished this big project, and I've put on hold. City of Toledo has wanted me to do a median home sale price survey, which I've done also for. You haven't seen that work, but I've done that too for Cuyahoga County and the suburbs and the neighborhoods. So I promised them I'm going to get right on it as soon as I finish this. But I think I should be able to get that done in September. I might be able to get to this in October and November. But it sounds like you're not necessarily looking at January 1 anyway.
No, we have, our finance department right now has a tremendous amount of work, and we've got, it's budget season for us.
Okay, so it's a
But I
non-issue.
was looking at it being advantage it's budget season, because perhaps we could put
Put it in the budget.
the survey into the
Oh, I see.
2025 budget.
Okay,
And then we still have these discussions as we go through
I
next
see what you
year.
mean.
And if maybe pull in some other municipalities if we have time and the feeling that we wanna do that, so it's kinda like
Yeah.
Toledo comes, you can,
Right,
they can work it out, and they'll have
Yeah.
that Addie send out a doodle poll.
Sure.
And I'm feeling like
Yeah.
Counselor Fosh needs to be going.
And for what timeframe are we looking at that? For next month or towards the end of this month?
Doesn't matter to me.
Towards the end of September or October?
Or the end of September? I can look on that.
Yeah, maybe like the last week in September.
Just wondering.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you for your.
Alright, so.
I appreciated your comments and questions.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
just,
I'm,
in our
thank you
contract,
so much for coming,
Sure.
it was an
haven't done
honor.
anything
Okay.
since we
I'm
started
gonna
it.
adjourn this meeting at 5:13.